When considering the Atlantis myth, we constantly reference Plato's dialogue, and with good intentions. There are very little other records out there where we can say, yeah, this is related to Plato's description. But there are also loose documentations of forgotten civilizations from around the same period in time in which Plato may have been referencing. Plato got his knowledge of Atlantis from Egypt, and there are descriptions to this day of a great seafaring civilization, and the dynastic Egyptians reference them as the Sheridan. Plato states that Atlantis waged a war with Athens and that there was a great event that occurred that destroyed Atlantis. Of course, recently the great work put forward from the researchers of visiting Atlantis has traced this event to have possibly taken place at Mauritania. But what happened to the Atlanteans? Who were they, and more importantly, where did they go after the civilization collapsed, literally into the sea? Wait till you hear this. It may surprise you that in Egypt there are stories that exist to this very day of a great civilization that almost conquered the land of Egypt, but the Egyptians don't say exactly where they came from or even where they went, leaving the door open to link the historical dots in this fantastical mystery of the ancient situation. Imagine if the land of a great empire was brought to its knees, no longer a habitable, stable land after a catastrophic event had taken hold. Would that empire strike out in anger to try to establish survival of its people and indeed its society? The Atlanteans came from the Atlantic and into the Mediterranean, where they struck out in anger at the Athenians. That much we know, but get this. At the Temple of Karnak in Egypt, there are tales of a great victory over a mighty naval force who were all about plundering coastal towns and cities of the region for all they could get their hands on. The stories are very reminiscent of what we are told of the Viking civilization, forcing us to speculate that the Vikings were the depleted survivors of the Atlanteans. The Sea Peoples were a confederacy of naval raiders who harried the coastal towns and cities of the Mediterranean region, concentrating their efforts especially on Egypt. The nationality of the Sea Peoples remains a mystery, as the existing records of their activities are mainly Egyptian sources who only describe them in terms of battle, such as the record from the Stela at Tanis, which reads, in part, "They came from the sea in their warships, and none could stand against them." This description is typical of Egyptian references to these mysterious invaders. No ancient inscription names the coalition as Sea Peoples. This is a modern-day designation first coined by the French Egyptologist Gaston Maspero in 1881. Maspero came up with the term because the ancient reports claim that these tribes came from the sea or from the islands, but they never say which sea or which islands, and so the Sea Peoples' origin remains unknown. The three great pharaohs who recorded their conflicts and victories over the Sea Peoples are Ramesses II, his son and successor Mer-Imptah, and Ramesses III. All three claimed great victories over their adversaries, and their inscriptions provide the most detailed evidence of the Sea Peoples. Ramses the Great was one of the most effective rulers in the history of ancient Egypt, and among his many accomplishments was securing the borders against invasion by nomadic tribes and securing the trade routes vital to the country's economy. Early in his reign, the Hittites seized the important trade center of Kadesh, and in 1274 BC, Ramses led his army to drive them out. Ramses claimed a great victory and had the story inscribed in detail and read to the people. His claim to total victory is disputed by the Hittites' account, claiming their own, but the inscription is important for many other reasons than Ramses would have had in mind, and among them, what it says about the Sea Peoples. In his account, they are mentioned as allies of the Hittites, but also as serving in his own army as mercenaries. No mention is made of where they came from or who they were, which suggests to scholars that the audience would have already had this information. The Sea Peoples needed no introduction. Ramses also relates how, in the second year of his reign, he defeated these people in a naval battle off the coast of Egypt. He allowed the Sea Peoples' warships and their supply and cargo vessels to approach the mouth of the Nile, where he had a small Egyptian fleet positioned in a defensive formation. He then waited in the wings for the Sea Peoples to attack what seemed to be an insignificant force before launching his full attack upon them from their flanks and sinking their ships. This battle seems to have involved only the Shurdan, or at least they are the only ones mentioned, because after the battle, many were pressed into Ramses' army and some served as his elite bodyguard. Ramses, always very confident in his inscriptions, gives the impression that he had neutralized the threat of these people, but in his successor's inscriptions tell another story. Merimta continued to be troubled by the Sea Peoples, who allied themselves with the Libyans to invade the Nile Delta. Merimta's scribes write how in the 5th year of his reign, Merai, the chief of the Libyans, allied with the Sea Peoples to invade Egypt. He refers to the Libyan allies as coming from the seas to the north. Scholars have since tried to identify where these lands were and what names they came to be known by, but without success. There are as many theories surrounding who these people were as there are scholars to refute them. Whoever they were, Merimta described them as formidable adversaries, and in his inscription on the walls of the temple of Karnak and on the stela from his funerary temple, takes great pride in defeating them. It seems the invading civilization were seeking to establish permanent settlements in Egypt, as the invading force brought with them scores of household goods and building tools, as if they had taken all they could carry from their own desolate land. Think about it. Something would have had to have happened to them to attempt this in the first place. Perhaps we can find the answer in the Cataclysm of Mauritania, the home of these so-called Sea Peoples, the Atlanteans, as it were. Merimta met with the Sea People on the field of Pair, where they combined Egyptian forces of infantry, cavalry, and archers, slew over 6,000 of their opponents, and took captive members of the royal Libyan family. Merimta claimed complete victory, and Egypt's borders were again secure. To celebrate his accomplishment, he had the story immortalized in the Karnak inscription and also on the famous stela found in his funerary temple at Thebes. The Merimta's stela conclusion reads, "The princess prostrates themselves, saying, 'Peace, not one of the 9 bows dares raise his head.' Tehenu is plundered while Haiti is peaceful. Canaan is seized by every evil. Ashkelon is carried off and Gezer is seized. Yinoam is made as that which never existed. Israel is wasted without seed. Kor is made a widow of Egypt. All the lands are at peace. Everyone who travels has been subdued by the king of Upper and Lower Egypt." The 9 bows mentioned is the customary term the Egyptians gave their enemies, and Tehenu is the name for Libya. The inscription is announcing how Merimta has defeated all the contentious regions who rose against Egypt and subdued them, bringing peace. The Merimta stela is the first mention of Israel in recorded history, but interestingly refers not to a country or region, but to a people. Scholars still do not know what this reference means. Like the Sea Peoples, this reference to Israel continues to intrigue historians and researchers in the present day. Merimta was satisfied that the Sea Peoples had been defeated and Egypt secured for the future. During the reign of the pharaoh Ramses III, however, the Sea Peoples attacked and destroyed the Egyptian trading center at Kadesh, and then again attempted an invasion of Egypt. They began their activities with quick raids along the coast before driving for the delta. Ramses III defeated them in 1180 BC, but they returned in force. In his own victory inscription, Ramses III describes the invasion. "The foreign countries conspired in their lands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could resist their arms and were being cut off at one time. They desolated its people, and its land was like that which had never existed. They were coming forward toward Egypt, while the flame was prepared for them. They laid their hands upon the lands as far as the circuit of the earth. Their hearts were confident and trusting as they said, 'Our plans will succeed.'" The countries mentioned in the Confederation of Sea Peoples might be the region of Palestine or Syria, but this is uncertain. It is clear, though, that these are the same people, with some additions, who attacked Egypt with the Libyans in the time of Merimta. In this invasion, as in the earlier one, the Sea Peoples were allied with Libyans, and as Ramses III notes, they were confident of victory. They had already destroyed the Hittite state in 1200 BC, and when Ramses III writes, they were coming forward towards Egypt, he would most likely be saying they were advancing steadily without opposition. Ramses III would have known of his predecessors' clashes with these people and that they were to be taken very seriously. He decided against a field engagement and chose guerrilla warfare as a strategy instead. He set up ambushes along the coast and down the Nile Delta and made especially effective use of his archers, positioning them hidden along the shoreline to rain down arrows on the ships at his signal. Once the ship's crew was dead or drowning, the vessels were set on fire with flaming arrows. The attack by sea had been crushed, and Ramses III then turned his attention to what was left of the invading force on land. He employed the same tactics as before, and the Sea Peoples were finally defeated. Egyptian records again detail a glorious victory in which many of the Sea Peoples were slain and others taken captive and pressed into the Egyptian army and navy or sold as slaves. Although Ramses III had saved Egypt from conquest, the war was so expensive it drained the royal treasury, and the tomb builders at the village of Setmat could not be paid. This led to the first labor strike in recorded history, where the workers walked off the job and refused to return until they were fully compensated. After their defeat by Ramses III, the Sea Peoples vanished from history, the survivors of the battle perhaps being assimilated into Egyptian culture. No records indicate where they came from, and there are no accounts of them after 1178 BC. But for almost 100 years, they were the most feared sea raiders in the Mediterranean region and a constant challenge to the mighty and prosperous Egypt. There is no widespread agreement on who the Sea Peoples were, even though one will find plenty of scholars and would-be scholars arguing heatedly for their particular claim. The Egyptian inscriptions discussed here provide almost all there is to know of these people outside of references in letters from the Hittites and Assyrians, which shed no more light on the subject. That they are well known to the Egyptians is clear from the fact that they are never introduced as a foreign people, and the possibility they were friends or even allies of Egypt is suggested by their presence in the army of Ramses the Great and the sense of surprise expressed at the invasions. Historian Mark van de Meerop writes, both Merimta and Ramses III present the attacks as sudden events, unforeseen and with massive numbers of people involved. Ramses III's reliefs even show carts loaded with women, children, and household goods, as if a population movement was involved. His account of the Atlanteans' appearance in the north of the eastern Mediterranean suggests that it was unexpected, very sudden, and highly destructive. But Merimta had reported occurrences of the same type 30 years earlier, nor were the names of the members of the Sea People new in the Egyptian record. Several of them appeared decades earlier. These people are also mentioned in the literature of Egypt in the Tale of Wenemem, most notable where they appear as familiar figures in the Mediterranean landscape. Why these people rose up so regularly against Egypt continues to mystify historians and scholars. Historians believe the question of these people's identity will never be known, and there is no longer a point in trying to discover it. One can wonder why the Sea Peoples have engendered so much passion, and why they still appear in every textbook on world history remains to be explained. What do you guys make of the Egyptian text regarding these people? Can it be related to Plato's account? Are these references to the mighty Atlanteans and the collapse of their society that forced them to try to move their people to a more prosperous country? The accounts do sound like the Viking landings of Northern Europe. Perhaps they are one and the same people, and if so, are the Scandinavians the descendants of such a mighty, far-reaching civilization? Just some food for thought which we thought you would find interesting. For now, we don't have the answers, but at least we do have the questions. Comments below, and as always, thank you for watching.